Greetings everyone and welcome. My name is Ryan Sagers, and this video is the first in a series of lectures designed as a companion to my book, Why Ask Why? Unlocking Philosophy for Curious Minds. So whether you have the book in front of you or you're just curious about philosophy, you're in the right place. In this first lecture, we're going to lay the groundwork. We'll ask what philosophy is. We'll look at how human beings acquire knowledge in the first place. Walk through the four main branches of philosophy, and then spend some real time with a figure who, more than anyone else, made philosophy what it is today, Socrates. Let's get into it. The logical place to start is by asking the question, what is philosophy? The answer to this question might vary, but there is a useful place to begin, and that's with the word itself. The English word philosophy comes from two Greek words, philo, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. So philosophy, quite literally, is the love of wisdom. And when we love something, we long for it, we desire it, we seek after it. We can then ask ourselves, well, what is wisdom? Well, one definition is that wisdom is the ability to apply knowledge and experience to real-world problems and settings. So it's one thing to be highly intelligent or to have a lot of knowledge stuffed in your head, but knowing how to apply that knowledge in the real world, in your relationships, in your work, in the hard decisions of life, that's a sign of wisdom. Philosophy then isn't a casual interest, it's a deep pursuit. It involves seeking wisdom earnestly, reflecting on it regularly, and applying it to the challenges of daily life. Another way to understand philosophy is to look at how we as human beings actually obtain knowledge in the first place. In general, there are two primary ways that we acquire knowledge. Think of them as two buckets, and philosophy as the discipline that we use to examine the contents of both. The first bucket is sensory experience, the knowledge that we obtain through our senses. So you'll recall that we have 5 of them: taste, touch, sight, smell, and hearing. If I touch a hot stove, I know through my sense of touch that this was a terrible idea. I can look out the window here in South Florida and I can see what the weather is doing. These are examples of knowledge gained through sensory experience. And this bucket forms the basis of scientific knowledge and much of everyday life. The second bucket is thought or reason, knowledge we obtain by thinking without relying on the senses. Now, how exactly can we obtain knowledge by just thinking? Well, let's consider numbers and mathematics for a moment. We use math to do a variety of things, from balancing our personal bank accounts to creating complex algorithms that run complicated digital systems. But when you stop and think philosophically about numbers, it gets interesting. So let me ask you, what is this orangish object on the right of the screen? Well, most people would answer this is the number 7. But what if I made the argument that this is not the number 7? This is the numeral 7. A numeral is a symbol that represents a number. We might ask then, well, why do we need numerals at all? And the answer is that numbers themselves do not exist in the physical world. You'll never take a walk outside or take a walk in the woods and see the number 7 sitting in a tree or flying in the sky or swimming in the ocean. I might see a numeral 7 on a mailbox or maybe a street sign, but I will never see the actual number 7 laying on the ground. This is because numbers don't actually exist in nature. I will never experience a number with my 5 senses. I can represent the number 7 like this, a Roman numeral, or I can represent it like this, an Arabic numeral. But in either case, we are not looking at the real number 7, only a representation of the abstract idea of 7. An interesting philosophical question is, did we discover numbers or did we invent them? And that's a question that can keep your brain busy for a while. The terms philosophers use for these two categories are empiricism and rationalism. Empiricism is the belief that we acquire knowledge through sensory experience. Rationalism is the belief that we acquire knowledge through thought or reason. Plato is often considered a rationalist. His student Aristotle is often described as an empiricist, although neither one of them used those terms. So knowing what these two terms mean is going to be critical to understanding philosophy. If you miss this idea, you'll struggle to catch on to what many philosophers are trying to do. Most philosophers and their ideas fall into one of these camps or the other, and most philosophical arguments that you'll encounter will either be empirical arguments or rational arguments. So before this lecture series is over, the goal is for you to instinctively recognize when you're hearing an empirical argument and when you're hearing a rational one. To help us better understand philosophy, it's important to note that there are 4 main divisions or branches of philosophy. Now, if you Google how many branches of philosophy there are, you'll get a variety of answers. Some will say 7, some will say 15. It's going to vary. But I wrote the book, so for our purposes here, we'll keep it simple and we'll go with 4. The first and oldest branch is metaphysics. Remember, empirical knowledge is the type I gain through my senses, through seeing, touching, tasting, hearing, smelling. Metaphysics is concerned with what ultimate reality is. It asks questions like, is reality only what we can experience empirically through our senses? Or are there real things that cannot be perceived by the senses? For example, does God exist? Do I have a spirit that will live on beyond my death? Is my mind or my consciousness something different than my brain? Do I have free will? Am I free to make choices? Or is my life predetermined? These are all metaphysical questions trying to understand if there's more to reality than meets the eye, or more accurately, more than meets the senses. And for those who say, no, I can only know what I experience through my senses, we could challenge them by asking, well, what about numbers? You cannot experience numbers through your senses. You cannot experience numbers empirically. So the question is, are numbers real? And yet we rely on numbers in mathematics to solve real-world problems, even though numbers do not exist in the material world. It's a bit mind-blowing. The next branch is epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge itself. Epistemology asks questions like, how can we know something? Is all knowledge universal, or is it simply personal? In other words, can you know everything I know? Or can I only know what I know and you only know what you know based on our individual lived experiences? Is there a limit to what humans can understand? Is there a difference between knowing something and merely believing something? Are we born with knowledge or are we born blank slates? Many evolutionary biologists will argue that we're actually born with a lot of knowledge that is pre-coded into our DNA, genetic knowledge passed down from our ancestors. Notice that we've already been having an epistemological conversation when we talked about empiricism and rationalism. The next branch is axiology. Axiology is the study of what is valuable and why. Now, when we hear the word value, we might be thinking in monetary terms. So for example, a piece of property on Miami Beach is considered more valuable than a piece of property nearby in Kendall, Florida. Both perfectly acceptable properties, both good for shelter and privacy, both good places to prepare meals, to sleep, and to raise a family. But one property might be $40 million more than the other. It's considered to be of higher value. So philosophically, we might ask, why? Both properties fulfill the basic definition of a safe and sound home. Now, when we talk value, we're not only talking about monetary value or money. Axiology also deals in aesthetics, the question of what is beautiful. We've all heard the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That is an aesthetic statement. What might be beautiful to me may not be beautiful to you. So I don't know if you saw this in the news a while back, but some guy in a costume smeared cake on Da Vinci's famous painting, the Mona Lisa. And at first I thought this was just another crazy story. But then I started thinking about the painting itself. And why is it perhaps the most famous painting in the world? Because honestly, I don't get it. I'm not necessarily moved by that painting. I'm not saying it's a bad painting. I personally couldn't replicate it. I just fail to see the beauty that others apparently see. And to be fair, I've never seen it in person, so maybe I just need to stand in front of the real thing to appreciate it. I don't know. But the aesthetic question is, why are some people awestruck by this painting and others, like myself, seem to be missing something? We can ask the same about music, about architecture. For example, I love jazz, especially jazz guitar. But it's generally music I listen to when I'm alone because most people I know don't care for it. That is a matter of aesthetic taste. Ethics also falls under the wider umbrella of axiology. So when we ask, what is the morally right thing to do? We're exploring why one action is morally preferable over another action. In other words, we're dealing in axiological value judgments. Our fourth branch is logic. Logic is the systematic study of reasoning focused on the principles that govern valid inference and argument. It gives us a framework for evaluating the structure and coherence of arguments, distinguishing between those that are sound and those that are flawed. Logic includes formal systems such as deductive and inductive reasoning. And it also includes informal logic, which deals with everyday argumentation and fallacies. At its core, logic is about clarity, consistency, and the pursuit of truth through structured thought. We'll be taking a much deeper dive into logic in a later lecture. In each branch of philosophy, we begin with a question: what problem am I trying to solve? If I'm trying to solve what philosophers call the mind-body problem, in other words, are the mind and the brain the same thing, or are they separate phenomena? What is consciousness? Those are metaphysical questions, and I'd turn to metaphysics to explore the answer. If I want to explore philosophically why some people love jazz music and others prefer country music, that's a question for aesthetics. And I'd turn to axiology. So with all of this established, we can ask the question, why study philosophy? And there are no right or wrong answers here, but I want to offer one way to look at it. And it comes from the philosopher Socrates, who said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." So what do you think Socrates was trying to say there? Hold that question. We're going to come back to Socrates in a moment, and we'll spend some real time with him. Studying philosophy offers significant rewards, both theoretical and practical. Theoretically, philosophy fosters intellectual humility and depth of thought. It encourages us to question unexamined assumptions, consider alternative viewpoints, and develop a coherent worldview. In an age of abundant information, some of it good, much of it not, philosophy helps us distinguish reliable knowledge from misinformation. Practically, philosophy builds real skills, critical thinking, clear writing, ethical reasoning, effective argumentation. People who train in philosophy tend to do well across different careers: law, business, medicine, technology, public policy, because they can handle uncertainty, identify inconsistencies, and communicate complex ideas. On a personal level, philosophy helps with the big decisions: relationships, career, moral challenges, and how we respond to suffering and meaning. Before we get into Socrates himself, we need to introduce one of the tools philosophers use to do their work. We call it the thought experiment. A thought experiment is an exaggerated hypothetical scenario that helps us think through problems. Philosophers use them to stress test their ideas. So if you've ever had a parent or maybe a teacher say to you as a kid, if your friends all jumped off a cliff, would you follow them? So that's kind of a thought experiment. Of course, your friends aren't going to go jump off a cliff. But the idea is to get you to ask yourself whether following the crowd is a good idea. Thought experiments are useful because they let us explore complex ideas, test hypotheses, and challenge assumptions in a safe, imaginative space. They strip away real-world constraints, practical limitations, and ethical concerns so that we can focus on the core principles at play. They sharpen critical thinking and reveal insights that would be harder to spot in messy real-life scenarios. Perhaps the most famous philosophical thought experiment is Plato's allegory of the cave, and it comes from Plato's book, The Republic. Consider the following.
Thousands of years ago, the Greek philosopher Plato imagined a strange and unsettling thought experiment. He called it the allegory of the cave. Imagine a world beneath the earth, a vast cave. Outside, beyond the entrance, the sun shines over mountains, rivers, trees, and the living world. But deep inside the cave, there are prisoners. They have been there since childhood, chained, unable to turn their heads, unable to look behind them. All they can see are shadows dancing on the wall before them. Behind the prisoners burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, strange puppet masters move objects before the flames. A horse, a vase, human figures, birds. The prisoners cannot see the real objects. They see only the shadows, and because they have never known anything else, the shadows become their reality. They argue over them, study them, even reward those who can best predict which shadow will appear next. To them, the cave is not a prison, it is the world. But one day, something changes. One prisoner breaks free. At first, he can barely stand. The chains fall from his wrists. He turns around for the very first time, and what he sees confuses him. The shadows on the wall were not real. There were objects behind him all along. He stares in bewilderment at the puppet masters, at the strange figures moving before the fire, and then he sees the fire itself, his first glimpse of light. It hurts his eyes, but he cannot look away. Slowly, cautiously, he begins walking deeper through the cave passage, toward the distant opening, toward something brighter. The closer he gets to the surface, the more painful the light becomes. He shields his eyes. He stumbles. The world outside overwhelms him. At first, he can see only shadows and reflections. He kneels beside a puddle and sees himself for the first time. Then slowly, his eyes begin to adjust. He looks around in amazement. Trees, grass, wind, clouds, living creatures, a real horse, a real vase. Not shadows, but reality itself. And finally, he lifts his eyes upward and sees the sun, the source of all light, the source that made everything else visible. For the first time in his life, he understands. The prisoner laughs, runs, skips across the fields, overcome with wonder at the beauty of the world beyond the cave. But then, he remembers the others, still chained below, still staring at shadows. And so he returns to the cave to tell them what he has found. But when he enters the darkness again, the prisoners mock him. They say the journey ruined his eyes. They laugh at his strange stories about another world, about truth, about light. And when he tries to free them, they grow angry, hostile, violent. The prisoners would rather kill the man who escaped than question the shadows they have always known. So the freed prisoner turns and walks sadly back toward the light, never to return. But Plato's story was never really about caves, or chains, or shadows on stone walls. It was about us. Today, the cave looks different. The shadows have changed. Now the puppet masters live behind glowing screens. They compete for your attention, your outrage, your loyalty. They tell you what to fear, what to consume, what to believe, what political tribe to join, what causes deserve your anger, what music to listen to, what opinions are acceptable, what to wear, how to conform, how to obey. And everywhere, people walk through glowing cities with blue light reflected in their eyes, mistaking algorithms, headlines, feeds, influencers, and endless outrage for reality itself. The modern cave does not chain the body, it chains the mind, and the shadows have never been more convincing. Plato understood something timeless. Most people do not want the truth. They want comfort, they want certainty, they want familiar shadows. Because turning toward the light is painful. It demands courage, it demands questioning, it demands the willingness to leave behind everything you once believed was real. And yet, the invitation remains, just as it did thousands of years ago, to turn away from the shadows, to step outside the cave, to look upward, and to ask yourself, what will it take for you to look up from the screen and see the light?
So that was a metaphysical thought experiment used by Plato to raise questions about reality. So let's unpack this a bit. The prisoners chained in the cave, who from birth only ever see shadows on the wall, take those shadows to be the whole of reality. The fire behind them and the puppeteers carrying objects in front of the fire cast the shadows the prisoners spend their lives interpreting. If one prisoner is freed and comes out of the cave, the sunlight is painful at first. He has to adjust gradually. First the reflections in water, then the objects themselves, then the stars, and finally the sun. And when he returns to the cave to tell the others what he's seen, they don't believe him. They mock him. In Plato's telling, they might even try to kill him. The cave represents the world of appearances, the shadows we take for reality. The ascent out of the cave represents philosophical education. Painful at first because it challenges deeply held beliefs, but leading toward genuine understanding. And the returning prisoner's fate is a warning about the resistance philosophers face when they try to enlighten others. Plato wrote this, of course, after watching his own teacher Socrates be executed by the city of Athens. In our own time, the allegory resonates in a striking way. Social media algorithms, news outlets, curated feeds, these are the puppeteers projecting shadows on our walls. We mistake those shadows for the full picture. And Plato's message is that the way out is the same as it ever was. Question, reason, and pursue deeper truths. We met Socrates a few minutes ago, so let's take a deeper dive into who he was and why he matters. Socrates was born around 470 BC in Athens. His father was a sculptor and a stonemason. His mother was a midwife, helping to deliver babies to Athenian citizens. Socrates married a woman named Xanthippe and had 3 sons with her. He served as a soldier, a hoplite, in the Peloponnesian War, where he was known for his bravery. After the war, he lived simply often barefoot, relying on the hospitality of friends rather than charging for his teachings. Now, Socrates was not the first philosopher. Before him, there were thinkers we call the pre-Socratics, Thales, Heraclitus, Parmenides, and others who were already asking fundamental questions, mostly about the physical world and the nature of the universe. In many ways, Socrates can be thought of as the Elvis Presley of philosophy, just as Little Richard, Bo Diddley, and Chuck Berry laid the groundwork for rock and roll. The pre-Socratics laid the groundwork for philosophical inquiry. But it was Elvis who brought the music to a wider audience and turned it into a cultural phenomenon. In a similar way, Socrates took philosophy out of abstract speculation about nature and made it a public conversational pursuit centered on self-examination, ethics, and the good life. Socrates didn't leave any readings behind, at least that we're aware of. Much of what we know about him comes from his student, Plato. Socrates was known for engaging the citizens of Athens in philosophical dialogue, in the marketplaces, in public spaces, with anyone willing to talk. Some people in the community thought he was a genius. Other people thought he was a nuisance. Eventually, the people who thought he was a nuisance won out. Socrates was tried and executed by the Greek state. His charges were impiety, arguing for a god that was different than the accepted Greek gods of the time, and corrupting the youth. We don't know exactly what this second charge means, but it probably meant something like putting ideas in the minds of the young people that authority figures found dangerous. After his conviction, Socrates was approached by a number of his followers who told him they could help him escape. He'd have to go into hiding and probably never engage in philosophy again, but he'd remain alive. Socrates refused. He argued that fleeing would undermine the laws of Athens, the laws that he had implicitly agreed to uphold his entire life as a citizen. He wanted to be known as someone who upheld the law, even though he was being accused of breaking it. Socrates was given hemlock to drink, essentially a lethal poison, and he was surrounded by his friends and followers when he died. It was said that Socrates was curious about death. He thought it would be either a dreamless sleep, which sounded appealing, or it would mean he would live on beyond death and continue learning and experiencing whatever the afterlife had to offer, which also sounded appealing. Socrates had a famous student, Plato. Plato went on to found the Academia, the academy, something like a prototype of an early university, with Plato as the master teacher. And Plato, in turn, had his own famous student named Aristotle. It is Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle who laid the foundations of Western philosophy and provided much of the basis of Western culture and thought. In time, Christianity would emerge as the official religion of Rome. And together with Greek philosophy, the foundations of the Western world were developed. Each of us is a recipient of that legacy. One of the most important contributions of Socrates is the Socratic method, sometimes called the Elenchus. It's a method of inquiry, and you can break it down in just a few steps. Step 1, recognize that we know nothing. Socrates was known for his humility and his willingness to admit what he did not know. So this was considered one of his greatest strengths. He's often quoted as saying, "I know that I know nothing." And that posture of intellectual humility is the starting point of the whole method. Step 2, ask questions relentlessly. In his dialectical method, Socrates would ask questions, not to win an argument, but to pursue the truth, question after question, drawing out what people actually believed underneath what they were saying. Step 3, define your terms. During his dialogue, Socrates would pause and make sure he understood the definitions of the concepts people were using. If we're going to talk about justice, what do we mean by justice? If we're going to talk about piety, what do we mean by piety? Without clear definitions, the conversation goes nowhere. Step 4, expose contradictions. Through that questioning and defining, Socrates was able to expose contradictions in the arguments of the people he was talking with. Step 5, resolve toward truth. Then Socrates would work to resolve those contradictions through continued dialogue, with the aim of arriving at truth. So let's look at an actual example of this method in action. Plato used Socrates as the central figure in many of his writings. And Plato had an interesting literary style. His writing reads like the script of a play. One character says something, and the other character replies. And these are known as the Platonic dialogues. Consider the following dialogue known as the Thrasymachus dialogue. In it, Socrates engages with a Greek citizen named Thrasymachus, a sophist, which was a type of professional rhetorician that Socrates despised. The question on the table is, what is justice?
More than 2,000 years ago, in the bustling streets of ancient Athens, a question was asked that still unsettles us today. What is justice? Is it fairness? Obedience to the law? Giving people what they deserve? Or is justice merely a word invented by those in power to protect their own interests? In Book 1 of Plato's Republic, Socrates encounters one of the most formidable opponents in all of philosophy, Thrasymachus. Unlike the other participants in the discussion, Thrasymachus has little patience for abstract ideals or moral sentiment. He believes he sees the world as it truly is. To him, justice is not a noble virtue. It is a tool, a weapon, a story told by the powerful to keep the weak in line. What follows is one of the most famous confrontations in the history of philosophy, a clash between idealism and realism, between morality and power, between what ought to be and what is. The question posed in ancient Athens remains with us still. Is justice truly good, or is it merely the advantage of the stronger?
Hearken then, for I say that the just is nothing else than the advantage of the stronger. Well, why don't you applaud?
First, I must understand your meaning. Do you mean, for example, that if Polydamas the athlete is stronger than we are, and beef is advantageous to him for his body, this food is also advantageous, and just for us who are weaker?
You disgust me, Socrates. You take hold of the argument in the most malicious way possible.
Not at all, my good sir, but explain more clearly what you mean.
Don't you know that some cities are governed by tyranny, some by democracy, some by aristocracy?
Of course.
And the ruling power in each city is the stronger party?
Yes.
Each government enacts laws to its own advantage. A democracy, democratic laws, a tyranny, tyrannical ones, and so on. In enacting these laws, they make it plain that what is advantageous to themselves is just for their subjects, and whoever deviates from this, they punish as a lawbreaker and wrongdoer. This, then, is what I mean. In all cities, the just is the same, the advantage of the established ruling body. This, I take it, holds power, so that, for anyone who reasons correctly, the just is everywhere the same. The advantage of the stronger.
Now I understand your meaning. But does the stronger party never make mistakes? Do rulers sometimes enact laws that are not to their own advantage?
They do.
Then, according to your argument, it would be just to do what is disadvantageous to the rulers and the stronger.
A true ruler, insofar as he is a ruler, does not err. He enacts what is best for himself, and the subject must obey that. Justice is really the good of another, the advantage of the stronger and the ruler, and harmful to the obedient subject. Injustice, when on a sufficient scale, is stronger, freer, and more masterful than justice. As I said from the beginning, the just is the advantage of the stronger, while the unjust is what is profitable to oneself.
Summarizing the dialogue. The dialogue between Thrasymachus and Socrates in Book 1 of Plato's Republic is profoundly valuable for students of philosophy because it vividly introduces one of the most enduring debates in ethical and political thought. Whether justice is an objective virtue intrinsic to human flourishing, or merely a conventional tool serving the interests of the powerful. Thrasymachus' bold assertion that justice is the advantage of the stronger presents a sophisticated realist challenge rooted in observable power dynamics that forces students to confront cynical views of morality still echoed in modern discussions of realism, relativism, and critiques of authority. Socrates' methodical refutation through questioning not only models the Socratic method in action, demonstrating how philosophy proceeds through critical dialogue rather than dogmatic assertion, but also lays the groundwork for the Republic's larger inquiry into the nature of the good life and the ideal society. By engaging with this exchange, we learn to question taken-for-granted assumptions about right and wrong, develop skills in logical analysis and argumentation, and appreciate why philosophy remains essential for understanding justice in any political community.
So watch what just happened there. Thrasymachus comes in boldly. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. In other words, whatever the people in power say is just is just. That's the deal. Socrates doesn't attack him head on. He doesn't say, "You're wrong and here's my theory." Instead, he accepts the premise for the sake of argument, and then he asks a quiet, almost innocent-sounding question. Do rulers ever make mistakes? Do they sometimes pass laws that don't actually benefit them? Thrasymachus says, yes, they do. And right there, the whole argument collapses on itself. Because if rulers sometimes pass laws that don't benefit them, then by Thrasymachus' own definition, the just thing for citizens to do would be to obey laws that don't benefit the stronger, which contradicts the original claim that justice is whatever benefits the stronger. So notice Socrates never said, here's the right answer. He just kept asking questions until Thrasymachus' position falls apart under its own weight. And that is the Socratic method. So the technique we just watched Socrates use has a Latin name. It's called reductio ad absurdum, reduction to absurdity. And here's how it works. Socrates would hear a bold claim. Then, instead of attacking it directly, he would accept the claim as true for the sake of argument and follow it through to its logical conclusions. And often those conclusions turned out to be ridiculous or contradictory or just unacceptable. By reducing the original claim to an absurdity, he showed the claim couldn't be right, without ever having to assert his own competing position. So having this skill, being able to gently follow a bold claim out to its logical end, is enormously useful in our conversations about politics, ethics, and the social questions we often don't scrutinize as carefully as we should. As Daniel Dennett once put it, reductio ad absurdum is the philosopher's crowbar, a tool for prying open bad ideas by pushing them to their logical extremes and revealing the ridiculous consequences. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one last word on Socrates. It's a quote from the Roman philosopher Cicero, who wrote of Socrates this way: Socrates was the first to call philosophy down from the heavens and set her in the cities of men and compel her to ask questions about life and morality. And that's really the inheritance Socrates left us. Philosophy isn't just abstract speculation. It's a way of living. It's a habit of asking questions about life, about morality, about what we believe, and why we believe it. In an age of rapid technological change, endless information, and polarizing opinion, philosophy can feel like an ancient luxury, abstract debates far removed from daily life. But Socrates' insistence on the examined life reveals exactly the opposite. Without critical reflection, we risk living unthinkingly, shaped by unexamined assumptions, by media echoes, by social pressures, much like the prisoners in Plato's cave, mistaking shadows for reality. Philosophy matters because it gives us the tools to question, to reason, and to seek truth in the middle of all that confusion. So today we talked about what philosophy is. We talked about the two ways we acquire knowledge, empiricism and rationalism. And we walked through the four branches of philosophy. We introduced thought experiments through Plato's allegory of the cave, and we closed with Socrates and the Socratic method. If you want to go deeper into any of this, all of it is in Chapter 1 of Why Ask Why. In the next lecture, we'll take a deeper dive into logic and the principles of clear reasoning. Until then, take care and keep asking why.